Jasmine stood at the back of the church, her hands shaking as she clutched her small purse. The fancy building with its stained glass windows and polished wooden pews felt like another world compared to the small apartment she shared with her roommate. She wasn't dressed for a wedding, just jeans and a nice blouse she'd grabbed after her morning class, but she hadn't planned to be invited anyway. Through the crowd of well-dressed guests, she could see her father at the altar. Richard, the man who had left when she was 12 and never looked back. 10 years gone, and here he was, smiling in an expensive suit, about to marry a woman Jasmine had never even heard of. "You okay?" whispered an elderly woman sitting in the last row, noticing Jasmine hovering by the door. Jasmine nodded quickly and stepped back into the shadow of a large column. She wasn't ready to be noticed. Not yet. She hadn't meant to find out about the wedding. Last week, while waiting for her coffee at the local shop, she glanced at a newspaper someone had left behind. That's when she saw it, her father's face staring back at her from the society page. Local business executive Richard Williams to wed socialite Elena Thompson. The shock had nearly made her drop her drink. For years, she'd searched for him online, called old friends, even hired a cheap private investigator during her freshman year of college when she'd saved up enough from her waitressing job. Nothing. It was like he had disappeared into thin air after walking out on her and Mom. No child support, no birthday cards, no explanation. She'd imagined dozens of reasons. Maybe he'd started a new family and forgotten about her. Maybe he'd moved overseas. Maybe he was dead. But no. He was here, 30 minutes from the community college where she took classes, living a whole new life. Jasmine felt the weight of the key in her purse. She'd found it 3 months ago while cleaning out her mom's things. Her mother had passed away after a short, intense battle with cancer. The medical bills had eaten up everything they had. If her father had been around, if he'd helped instead of vanished. The key had been in a small envelope taped to the back of her mother's old jewelry box, along with a note, "For Richard, if something happens to me, he'll know what it means." Jasmine had spent weeks trying to figure out what the key opened. It wasn't to their apartment or her mom's car or anything else she could find. It looked like a safety deposit box key, but she had checked with all the local banks. Nothing under her mom's name. Then she found the documents hidden in a water-damaged box in their building's storage unit. Financial papers with her father's signature next to her mother's. Large sums of money. Offshore accounts. Dates that lined up exactly with when he disappeared. The wedding march began to play, pulling Jasmine back to the present. The crowd stood up. A beautiful woman in a white dress appeared at the far end of the aisle. Jasmine watched as her father's face lit up with a smile she used to know, the one he'd wear when he came home from work and scooped her up for a hug. A smile she hadn't seen in a decade. Something cold settled in Jasmine's stomach. All these years, she'd imagined her father might have had a good reason for leaving. Maybe he'd been in trouble. Maybe he'd been trying to protect them somehow. The kind of excuses a daughter makes for a father she desperately wanted to believe in. But seeing him now, successful, happy, surrounded by friends and luxury, she knew. He had simply chosen to start over. To erase his first family from his life like they were nothing more than a mistake to be corrected. The bride reached the altar. The music stopped. The minister began to speak. Jasmine's heart pounded so hard she felt dizzy. If anyone knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace. Jasmine stepped forward from her hiding place, the key clutched tightly in her hand. Every eye in the place would be on her in seconds. There would be no going back. She took a deep breath and walked down the aisle. The church glowed with soft light from hundreds of candles and flower arrangements worth more than Jasmine's entire tuition. White roses and lilies decorated every pew, their sweet smell filling the air. Through the stained glass windows, afternoon sunlight cast colorful patterns across the marble floor as Jasmine watched her father from the shadows. Richard stood tall at the altar, his salt and pepper hair neatly trimmed, looking nothing like the dad she remembered who used to wear old t-shirts and laugh too loudly at bad jokes. This man wore an expensive tailored suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent. His new life had clearly treated him well. Next to him, Elena was stunning in her designer wedding gown, with diamonds sparkling at her throat and wrists. Her veil was held in place by what looked like a family heirloom tiara. She smiled up at Richard with complete trust and love, unaware of the secrets he kept buried. "You may now exchange your vows," the minister said, his voice echoing through the packed church. Richard cleared his throat and began speaking, his words flowing smoothly as if rehearsed 100 times. "Elena, when I met you 3 years ago, I knew my life had changed forever. You brought light into my world when I needed it most." Jasmine felt her stomach twist. 3 years ago, she had been sending emails to his old address, still hoping for a response. 3 years ago, her mum had started getting sick. "You showed me what it means to start fresh," Richard continued, his voice cracking with what the guests probably thought was emotion. "To build something pure and beautiful from the ground up." A few women in the audience dabbed at their eyes with fancy handkerchiefs. An older man in the front row, probably Elena's father, Jasmine guessed, nodded approvingly. He looked important in his expensive suit, with the confident air of someone used to being in charge. Elena began her vows next, speaking about destiny and fate bringing them together, about how perfect their life was going to be, about the family they would build. Family. The word struck Jasmine like a slap. Did Elena know she was already a stepmother to a daughter her soon-to-be husband had abandoned? Did any of these people know Richard had another life before this one? The minister smiled warmly at the couple. "The rings, please." A young boy in a tiny suit walked forward, holding a small pillow with 2 gold bands. Richard's best friend. A tall man with a serious face, who kept glancing at his watch, patted the boy on the shoulder. "Richard Williams, you take Elena Thompson to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part." "I do," Richard said firmly, sliding the ring onto Elena's finger. The minister turned to Elena. "And do you, Elena Thompson, take Richard Williams to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part?" "I do," Elena replied, her voice full of happiness as she placed the ring on Richard's hand. If anyone can show just cause why this couple cannot be lawfully joined together in matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. A heavy silence filled the church. This was it, Jasmine's last chance. Her legs felt like they were made of stone as she stepped into the center aisle. The key dug into her palm where she clutched it too tightly. "I object," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. The crowd gasped, heads turned. Elena's smile froze on her face. Richard looked up, and for the first time in 10 years, father and daughter locked eyes. His face went white. He recognized her instantly. "Jasmine," he whispered, the name seeming to escape without his permission. Elena looked between them, confusion clouding her perfect day. "Richard, who is this?" Jasmine took another step forward. "I'm his daughter," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The one he left behind." The church erupted in shocked whispers. Elena's father stood up, his face darkening with anger. And Richard, the man who had walked away without looking back, suddenly looked like he might faint. The silence that followed Jasmine's words lasted only seconds, but to her it felt like hours. Every eye in the church was fixed on her, some confused, others shocked, a few already turning judgmental. She hadn't planned exactly what to say next. Standing here, facing her father after 10 years, her carefully rehearsed speech vanished from her mind. "Security," Richard finally called out, his voice cracking. He stepped forward, placing himself between Jasmine and his bride. "This young woman needs help. She's confused." 2 men in dark suits moved from the side walls toward Jasmine. She recognized the panic tactic. Make her look crazy, have her removed, go on with the perfect day like nothing happened. "I'm not confused, Dad," she said, emphasizing the last word. The simple term seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. "Or should I call you Richard Williams now?" "That's funny, because the last time I saw you, your last name was Jefferson." Another wave of whispers swept through the church. Elena grabbed Richard's arm, her knuckles white against her bouquet. "Richard?" she questioned, her voice small. "What is she talking about?" "Nothing, honey. She's disturbed," Richard insisted, but his eyes never left Jasmine. They were filled with something she recognized immediately: fear. "I was 12 when you left," Jasmine continued, taking another step forward. "Mom and I came home from my school concert, the one you were too busy to attend, and found the closets half empty and your dresser cleared out. No note. No goodbye. Just gone." She turned slightly, addressing the stunned crowd rather than just her father. "We thought something terrible happened to you. Mom filed a missing persons report. We called hospitals. I had nightmares for months that you were hurt somewhere, needing our help." Elena's father stood up now, an imposing man with silver hair and a face used to getting its way. "Young lady, this is hardly the place." "It's exactly the place," Jasmine cut him off, surprising herself with her boldness. Before anyone makes any vows about honesty and forever, they should know who they're really marrying. She opened her purse and pulled out a folded set of papers. "Mom died 3 months ago. Cancer. We couldn't afford the treatments that might have saved her. Funny thing though, while cleaning out her things, I found some interesting documents." Richard lunged forward suddenly. "That's enough. I don't know what game you're playing, but—" "No games," Jasmine replied, unfolding the papers with shaking hands. "Just some paperwork about offshore accounts opened 10 years ago. Accounts with millions of dollars that disappeared right before you did. Mom's signature is on them too, except she always swore she never signed anything like that. Said her signature must have been forged." The security men hesitated, looking uncertainly between Richard and the growing disturbance. Elena had stepped back from Richard, her face a mask of confusion and dawning horror. "She's lying," Richard said desperately, but his voice had lost its authority. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the church's cool air. Jasmine held up the key. This was with Mom's things too. A safety deposit box key with a note saying you'd know what it means. "I'm guessing whatever's inside would explain a lot, like why Judge Thompson over there helped make an investigation into your company's missing funds disappear right before you did." Elena's father, Judge Thompson, went completely still. His face, previously flushed with anger, drained of all color. "How dare you accuse?" he began, but Richard cut him off. "She doesn't know what she's talking about," Richard insisted, though his voice had taken on a pleading quality. He turned to Elena. "Baby, I'll explain everything later. This is just a misunderstanding." But Elena had stepped completely away from him now, her eyes darting between Richard and her father. "Dad?" she questioned. "What is she talking about? What investigation?" The wedding guests were no longer whispering but openly talking, some standing to get a better view of the unfolding drama. Someone's phone camera flashed. "I think," Jasmine said clearly, "that my father and your father have known each other much longer than anyone realizes, and I think they both have a lot to explain about what happened to that money and why I grew up without a dad while he built this fancy new life for himself." Judge Thompson suddenly moved forward, his hand outstretched toward Jasmine. "Give me those papers," he demanded, no longer bothering to hide his panic. "Give them to me now." Judge Thompson's sudden movement toward Jasmine sent a ripple of shock through the church. His usually composed face was twisted with anger as he reached for the papers in her hand. Several guests gasped. The photographer, who had been quietly documenting the ceremony, started snapping pictures rapidly. "Don't touch her." A woman in a blue dress stood up from the third row. She was one of Elena's bridesmaids. "What is wrong with you? She's just a girl." Jasmine stepped back, clutching the documents to her chest. She hadn't expected the judge to react so strongly. It confirmed everything she suspected. "These papers show that $3.2 million disappeared from Dad's company 10 years ago," Jasmine announced, her voice growing stronger. "The same week he vanished from our lives. The company nearly went bankrupt. People lost their jobs. My friend's dad couldn't find work for 2 years after." Elena had moved completely away from Richard now, her white dress pooling around her as she stared at her father and then back at her groom. "Richard, what is she talking about? Is this true? Do you have a daughter?" Richard's face had gone from pale to ashen. "Elena, please, let me handle this." "Answer me," Elena demanded, tears starting to streak her perfectly applied makeup. "Is she your daughter?" The church was so quiet you could hear the nervous breathing of the guests. Richard looked trapped, his eyes darting between his bride, Jasmine, and the increasingly agitated judge. Yes, he finally admitted, but it's complicated. I had another life before. Another life. Elena's voice rose. You mean a whole family you never mentioned? We've been together 3 years, Richard. 3 years of planning our future, and you never once thought to mention you had a child. One of Richard's groomsmen whispered something in his ear, but Richard shook him off. Jasmine stepped forward again. There's more. When Mom got sick, we had no health insurance. The treatments she needed, the ones that might have saved her, cost more than we could ever afford. I dropped out of college to work 2 jobs, but it wasn't enough. Meanwhile, she gestured around the lavish church. You were planning this. The revelation seemed to hit Elena like a physical blow. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, then back at Richard with new eyes. Your mother? Richard started, then stopped, seeming genuinely struck by the news. Patricia is dead. 3 months ago, Jasmine repeated. I sent messages to every email address and phone number I had for you. I put notices in newspapers. Nothing worked. Now I know why you weren't Richard Jefferson anymore. Judge Thompson had regained some of his composure, though his face remained flushed. None of this proves anything about me, he said, his authoritative courtroom voice booming through the church. These are wild accusations from someone clearly looking to extort money. That's not true. Jasmine cut in, unfolding one of the papers. This bank document has your signature on it, Judge Thompson. You helped set up the offshore account where the money went. The same signature that appears on court documents dismissing the embezzlement investigation 8 days after the money disappeared. The judge's face went from red to purple. You little. He lunged forward again, this time reaching Jasmine before anyone could react. His hand closed around her wrist, twisting painfully as he tried to grab the papers. Several people screamed. Richard yelled something inaudible. The best man rushed forward to intervene. In the struggle, Jasmine's purse fell, spilling its contents across the church floor. The safety deposit box key skidded across the marble, stopping at Elena's feet. Elena picked it up, staring at it as everything around her descended into chaos. Her father was still grappling with Jasmine while Richard tried to separate them. Guests were standing on pews to see better. Someone was filming with their phone. Stop it. All of you stop. Elena suddenly shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. She held up the key. This box. Where is it? Judge Thompson froze, his eyes fixed on the key in his daughter's hand. The color drained from his face. First National Bank, Jasmine said, rubbing her sore wrist as the judge finally released her. Downtown branch. My mom's note said he would know what it means. Richard stared at the key, then at Judge Thompson. Something unspoken passed between the two men. There's nothing in any safety deposit box, Richard insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. Then you won't mind if we go check right now, said Elena, still holding the key, her wedding dress gathered in her other hand as if preparing to walk out. The church had transformed from a place of celebration to one of complete chaos. Guests stood in clusters, whispering and pointing. The wedding party had scattered, some bridesmaids comforting Elena, groomsmen awkwardly shifting their weight from foot to foot, unsure what to do. Richard broke the tense silence first. Elena, sweetheart, let's not do this now. We can sort everything out after the ceremony. Elena stared at him like he'd grown a second head. After the ceremony? You think we're still getting married today? Of course we are, Richard said, desperation creeping into his voice. This is just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Elena repeated, her voice rising. You hid an entire family from me. Your daughter just told us her mother died while you were buying me diamonds. The best man, a tall man with kind eyes who seemed genuinely troubled by what was unfolding, stepped forward and placed a hand on Richard's shoulder. I think you should be honest here, Rich. I've known you for years, but this isn't right. Richard shrugged the hand away. Don't tell me what's right, he snapped. Then, seeming to realize how he sounded, he softened his tone. Look, there are things you don't understand. Then help us understand, the best man said quietly. Judge Thompson had recovered his composure and was now straightening his tie, attempting to restore some dignity. This is a private family matter that should be discussed away from prying eyes and cameras, he announced in his courtroom voice. I suggest we all "Call 911, said a voice from the crowd. A middle-aged woman stood up, phone in hand. "That man just assaulted that young lady. I recorded it." The judge's face tightened with anger. "I did no such thing. I was merely—" "You grabbed her wrist and tried to take her property," the woman insisted. "I've got it right here on video." Richard suddenly seemed to realize how quickly things were spinning beyond his control. He glanced toward the side door of the church, calculating. Jasmine saw it too. "He's going to run," she said loudly, "just like he ran from us." Richard froze, then tried to laugh it off. "Don't be ridiculous. I'm not going anywhere." But his eyes kept darting to the exit. The best man pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police," he said firmly. "Not 911. I have a friend in the financial crimes unit. This needs to be properly investigated." "Don't you dare," hissed Judge Thompson, stepping toward him. "Dad, stop it." Elena cried, still clutching the safety deposit box key. "What is wrong with you? Why are you acting like this?" The best man ignored the judge and dialed, turning slightly away as he spoke into the phone. "Hello, Tom. It's David. I need your help at First Baptist Church on Maple. Yes, right now. Bring your badge." Richard suddenly lunged for the door. Two of the groomsmen, moving with surprising speed, blocked his path. "Let me through," Richard demanded, his carefully constructed image completely crumbling. The polished businessman was gone, replaced by a desperate man with sweat pouring down his face. "Nobody's going anywhere until the police arrive," David said, putting his phone away. "They're 3 minutes out." Jasmine stood in the middle of it all, almost forgotten as the drama swirled around her. She hadn't expected things to go this far this fast. Part of her, the little girl who still remembered her father tucking her in at night, wanted to tell everyone to stop. But then she thought of her mother, working 2 jobs after Richard left, getting sicker and sicker, refusing treatments they couldn't afford. "The box," Jasmine said quietly, then louder. "The safety deposit box probably has evidence about the money. That's why he's trying to run. That's why Judge Thompson is so scared." Elena walked over to Jasmine, still in her wedding dress, mascara streaked down her cheeks. She held out the key. "Then let's go open it. Right now." Judge Thompson's face went completely white. "Elena, don't be foolish." "Was it worth it, Dad?" Elena asked, her voice breaking. "Was the money worth all this?" Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Richard made one more desperate dash for the door, shoving past a groomsman. This time, no one was quick enough to stop him. He burst through the side exit into the bright afternoon sunlight. He made it 3 steps before colliding with 2 police officers walking up the church steps. Richard stumbled backward after colliding with the officers, his eyes wide with panic. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, straightening his now rumpled suit jacket. "Sir, please stay where you are," said the taller officer, a woman with a no-nonsense expression. Her partner, a younger man with sharp eyes, was already taking in the scene, the fancy church, the man in a tuxedo, the commotion inside. "We got a call about a disturbance," the male officer said, "and possible financial crimes." By now, guests were spilling out onto the church steps, phones recording everything. Elena emerged, still in her wedding dress, but with her veil removed, clutching the safety deposit box key. Jasmine stood beside her, looking both exhausted and determined. Officers called David, the best man, pushing through the crowd. "I'm the one who called. I'm an assistant district attorney." He pulled out his credentials. "We have reason to believe this man," he pointed at Richard, "embezzled over $3 million 10 years ago and has been living under a partially false identity." Judge Thompson appeared at the church door, his face tight with controlled rage. When he saw the officers, he immediately switched to his public persona. "Officers, this is a personal family matter that's gotten out of hand. As a judge of the Superior Court, I can assure you—" "With all due respect, Your Honor," the female officer interrupted, "we need to hear from everyone involved." More police cars pulled up to the church. A man in a suit got out of an unmarked car, badge hanging from his neck. "Detective Wilson, Financial Crimes," he announced, walking up the steps. He nodded at David. "Got your call. What's going on?" David quickly explained the situation while Richard stood frozen between the officers, looking like a cornered animal. Judge Thompson kept trying to interject, mentioning his position and connections with increasing desperation. "The safety deposit box," Jasmine said, stepping forward. "My mom left this key with a note saying my dad would know what it means. I think whatever's inside will explain everything." Detective Wilson looked at the key in Elena's hand. "First National on Main Street." Elena nodded. "I have no idea what's in that box," Richard insisted. "Patricia must have set it up after I left." "Then you won't mind if we check," Detective Wilson said. It wasn't a question. The bank was only 6 blocks away. What followed was one of the strangest processions the city had ever seen. Police cars escorting a group that included a bride in her wedding dress, her father the judge, her almost husband in handcuffs, his long-lost daughter, and several witnesses from the wedding. The bank manager's eyes nearly popped out of his head when they all walked in. "Police investigation," Detective Wilson explained, flashing his badge. "We need access to a safety deposit box." The process took 15 agonizing minutes, verifying the key, checking records, finding the box. Richard and Judge Thompson stood under police watch, neither speaking nor looking at each other. Elena had moved to stand near Jasmine, both women watching the men who had betrayed them. Finally, the box was brought to a private room. Detective Wilson placed it on the table. "Who has legal right to open this?" he asked. "The box is registered to Patricia Jefferson," the bank manager said, checking his records, "with Richard Jefferson as co-owner." All eyes turned to Richard. His shoulders slumped in defeat. "Open it," Detective Wilson instructed. With shaking hands, Richard inserted the key and turned it. The lock clicked. He slowly lifted the lid. Inside lay several folders, a small recording device, and a letter in an envelope addressed simply, "To whom it may concern." Detective Wilson put on gloves and carefully removed the items. The first folder contained bank statements showing transfers of exactly $3.2 million to offshore accounts. The second held property deeds for land purchased under a shell company. The third contained photos of Richard and Judge Thompson meeting secretly, dated weeks before the money disappeared. "She knew," Richard whispered, his face ashen. "Patricia knew all along." Detective Wilson picked up the recording device and pressed play. Patricia's voice, thin but determined, filled the room. "If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone and Jasmine has found the truth. Richard didn't just leave us, he stole millions with Judge Thompson's help. I'd gathered this evidence over years but was threatened to stay quiet. They said they'd hurt Jasmine if I came forward. But now that I'm dying, there's nothing left for them to threaten me with. The truth needs to come out." Detective Wilson stopped the recording and looked at Richard and Judge Thompson. "Gentlemen, you're both under arrest." 6 months later, Jasmine sat on a hard wooden bench in the courthouse, watching as her father was led into the room in handcuffs. He looked smaller somehow, his expensive suit replaced by a plain blue button-up shirt and slacks. His hair, once perfectly styled, now showed patches of gray he'd previously covered with dye. The courtroom was packed. What had started as a personal family drama had exploded into one of the biggest financial crime cases the city had seen in decades. Reporters filled the back rows, notebooks ready. The investigation had uncovered far more than just the original embezzlement. Richard and Judge Thompson hadn't just stolen from one company. Over the years, they'd built a small empire based on fraud, blackmail, and abusing the judge's position to bury evidence. At least 12 other families had been affected, their savings or businesses destroyed by the pair's schemes. "All rise," called the court officer as the judge entered, not Thompson, of course, who was being tried separately, but a stern-looking woman known for her fairness. Jasmine stood, smoothing down her simple black dress. She bought it specially for today, her first new outfit in years. The money for it had come from the small advance on a book she was writing about her experience. She hadn't wanted the attention at first, but a publisher had convinced her that telling her story might help other victims of financial crimes. "You okay?" whispered the woman next to her. Jasmine nodded. Elena had become an unexpected ally through all this. After the wedding disaster, she could have disappeared from Jasmine's life. Instead, she'd shown up at Jasmine's tiny apartment a week later with coffee and a determination to make things right. "He fooled us both," Elena had said simply. Now they sat together, watching as the man who had hurt them both faced justice. The sentencing didn't take long. Richard had pleaded guilty to multiple charges as part of a deal to avoid an even longer sentence. The judge read out the crimes: fraud, embezzlement, identity theft, tax evasion, and more. 15 years in federal prison, plus restitution to all the victims. When asked if he wanted to make a statement, Richard stood slowly, his chains clinking. "I'd like to apologize," he said, his voice lacking the confidence it once had. "Especially to my daughter, Jasmine." He turned slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time that day. "What I did was unforgivable. I convinced myself I was doing it for a better life, but the truth is I was selfish. I missed watching you grow up. I missed being your dad. And your mother," his voice cracked. "Patricia was a better person than I ever was. She protected you until the end, while I just protected myself." Jasmine felt tears burning her eyes but refused to let them fall. Part of her, the little girl who'd waited by the window for years, hoping her dad would come back, wanted to run to him, to forgive everything. But the woman she'd become knew better. Outside the courthouse after the sentencing, reporters swarmed around Jasmine and Elena. "How does it feel to see justice served?" asked one, shoving a microphone in Jasmine's face. "It's not about feelings," Jasmine replied quietly. "It's about truth. For 10 years, I didn't know why my father left. Now I do. That's worth something." Elena squeezed her hand in support. Later that evening, Jasmine sat on the balcony of her new apartment, watching the sunset. The restitution money had allowed her to move to a safer neighborhood and re-enroll in college. Her mother's medical bills had been paid off. The nightmares about her father that had haunted her for years were finally beginning to fade. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. "Dinner tomorrow?" "My treat." Jasmine smiled and typed back, "Yes." She looked out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. Her story had started with loss and betrayal, but it wouldn't end that way. The safety deposit box key now hung on a chain around her neck, not as a reminder of what her father had done, but of her mother's strength and her own resilience. Sometimes family isn't what you're born into, but what you build from the broken pieces. Jasmine had learned that the hard way. But as she watched the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, she felt something she hadn't experienced in a very long time: peace.